Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. What is the thing that you can do to get the best out of your team? Or maybe your family, or maybe the people that are surrounding you? How do you create the conditions for people to be their best and to do their best work? I have spent a lot of years doing this in real time and researching it and collaborating with people and learning from other people on different ways to be able to effectively create that environment and to enable those conditions. And I have to tell you, sometimes the answers are surprising and they're not necessarily what you expect. And you think maybe it's not going to work until you try it. And when you do, it can be pretty amazing what you realize. And one of the things that I've realized over my time as a leader and over my time as an entrepreneur and just as a human being, as a family member, is that unless I, first of all, take care of myself and really tend to my own internal garden, I am not able to help others. And the way that I best do that is to deliberately create space. And the way that I do that is by pausing. And my guest today has written a book about just that, pause. My guest is Shawn Vanderhoven. I was thrilled when Shawn accepted my invitation to be on this show. He is somebody whose work has truly inspired me. I have learned a lot from him, and he is fun and just brings so much intelligence and thinking and insight to this conversation. So let me tell you a little bit about Shawn and our conversation, what you're about to hear. Shawn Vanderhoven leads the executive development practice for senior leaders and rising talent at the Wiseman Group. And he is also the author of the book, which is being released this week, called Pause: How to Lead Brilliant Work in a Busy World, which he wrote in partnership with his wife, Anne. Shawn has spent many years working with Liz Wiseman. He was a contributor on the Multipliers book and all of the research around that, which is a personal favorite of mine. I have learned so much from that, and I integrate that into a lot of my work. And what is so powerful about what Shawn and Anne did was when they started researching this book, they were really doing the research to find out what was it that created the conditions for people to do their best work. And through all of the time in the research and the hundreds of interviews that they did with various leaders and people and organizations, what they learned was that the most important thing that leaders could do to be able to create those conditions was to pause, was to tap the brakes and to not just dive into what they think they should be doing or how they've been patterned to do it, but to take the time to be able to step back, think about it on their own, and to give people the space to be able to create their best work at the same time that they are, as I said, tending to their own garden. It's a powerful conversation with Shawn because he talks about some of his own history, how he got to where he is today, but also some very impactful and surprising stories around what he learned in his various years of doing consulting and facilitation and research. Those real-time happenings that impact who you are and what you're discovering, and how when you start unearthing things, when you start helping people weed their gardens, what they then discover about themselves. And this book gives incredibly practical advice on not just what those issues are, maybe some of those problems or tensions, but ideas on how to resolve that, on how to create the space for ourselves and our teams to go into what he calls monk mode, maybe giving them the space to do their work on their own without interrupting them, without distracting them, and not just jumping in, not just falling into that gotta go, gotta do. The pause makes a massive difference. I've seen it in my own life. I coach so many leaders on doing this. It's remarkable, the results that they achieve. And I'm really excited to start implementing some of the practices from Shawn's book. I've been thinking a lot about it in the months since we recorded it, and it's a keeper. You're really going to enjoy this. So if you are feeling that you want to create conditions for you to do better work, or to be able to do that for the people around you, you are going to get so much out of this conversation. Enjoy. I am so excited for this conversation today. It's been a few months in the works, and this is a wonderful opportunity for me to meet somebody whose work I have been familiar with for a number of years. And having him here is a gift to me in addition to a gift to all of you. Welcome, Shawn Vanderhoven. Shawn, it's great to have you at the Courage Effect.
Oh, it's such an honor to be on. Thank you so much, and excited to spend this time together.
So much of the work, well, I was introduced to you via Multipliers. So your work with Liz Wiseman, and I am an avid watcher of the Leadership Matters podcast. And when I heard that you had a book coming out, I was super excited especially because it's called Pause. And that is something that as a leadership coach, I talk about, I think, in every single coaching session in one way or another, because so much of the world, as we keep getting faster and faster, not only is the change horizon getting shorter and shorter, but we all have a hell of a lot more to do than we have in the past. The pause is such a valuable thing. And because we tend to really think about speed as identity, the idea of, how do we keep working at this pace? It's just getting less and less sustainable as we go through. So as we talk about pause today, that's a big part. I want to make sure that we talk about the wonderful and practical techniques of this book as well. But I would love to hear a little bit more about you, Shawn, and how you came to this work.
Well, I was, I was 20, I think. And I was part of a nonprofit organization, and Stephen Covey came to speak at this event where I was. I mean, I was just a kid, and it was this almost this out of body experience. I had such an amazing time listening to him, the way he explained things. I remember thinking, wow, he's putting things together in a way that might really work for my brain. And I felt like a puzzle was being solved. Then I read the 7 Habits and had a really close friend where we were involved in this nonprofit work together that, he was much deeper in these concepts and loved these ideas. And so we made a commitment to each other that we someday would spend our time doing research and leadership development. And, years later, a couple of years after that, we actually had a meeting with Stephen Covey's co-founding partner, I guess you'd say. Hiram Smith came from the Franklin Quest side of the house. They bought Covey Leadership Center, if I remember right, and created, Franklin Covey. And we had this meeting where we pitched this technology idea. This is like in 2002 to Hiram Smith and some of the original founders from Franklin Quest. And, I'll never forget it. So we were these young guys, and we were saying, hey, we want to do what you do, but we've got this idea for you. And Hiram, I could tell he wasn't really listening. He was shaking his head a little bit. And then finally he looked at us and said, I'm not even too sure how you got me in this room. And I don't even know what you're talking about. He's like, well, let me tell you what I have to say for you is I think you need to go back to school, go get a job, do something valuable with the principles that you want to teach, and then start a leadership development company. And I took it serious. So I'd started this company with my friend. We, of course, were getting no business because we knew nothing about leadership. I stopped that immediately. I went back to my dad and said, Dad, he's had a software company. Would it be possible for me to work ground level up for you? And I'd like to see if I can make a difference here, and I'll go to school part-time. And so I did. I started to go to college part-time, and it took me 11 years to get my undergraduate. But I worked for 15 years for my dad, helping him build this software business and pretty much reading. And my wife was part of that story too, because she's a voracious reader. We wrote this book, Pause Together. And she would bring me business books that she loved because she could read much faster than me. I'm dyslexic, and I struggle to stay into books. I go very slow. But I always was in this learning journey, and she would bring things to me that she thought were interesting, and then I would try to apply them in the software business. Loved that experience. And then after 15 years, there was a window where I could come and work with a friend who was also working on a book. I moved out here to Silicon Valley and started working on a personal productivity project. A couple of years after that, I met Liz, and she was looking for somebody to help work on some projects. And she was just starting the 2nd edition of Multipliers research. I joined that team, and alas, I'm here.
Wow. That's a fascinating journey. And it sounds like your wife, what's her name?
Anne Vanderhoven. And so we wrote Pause together. The subtitle is How to Lead Brilliant Work in a Busy World. And I can honestly say that as we researched the book, we found that I was the antithesis of the leaders that were brilliant at this. She was more likely to be the one to pause us and slow things down and create space for focus. Mm-hmm. So it was really a brilliant experience because it helped me face, even while we were researching this book, some of the things that I've really struggled where I have a tendency I'm driven. I want to go fast and make decisions quickly and try things and break things. And I'm kind of guilty of amplifying chaos and going too fast. And so it was fun to do it together because we continue to see me in the book or in the research as what not to do. And then I saw so much in her on like what to do, but we had a lot of fun writing it together.
How amazing that you have both sides of that coin and that you learn from each other and that you experience that tension at the same time. So that is true partnership.
Oh, and tension it was. It's tough. It's tough to face your demons in good examples. And, and writing's hard anyways. And there were, when we got really frustrated because we would line edit each other's work, and that's brilliant because we were brutally honest with each other. So they'd push it to the next level, but sometimes you just got to take a walk around the block because it's hard, man. But it was in the end, I would do it again in a heartbeat. It was really an amazing experience.
That's wonderful. I also really appreciate that you are talking about, the advice of, well, get a job, basically like go work in an organization. Don't just study it, but also be in an environment where you get to sort of learn the chops and have some of the real life experience, because that is one of the things that I'm really amazed sometimes at people that, there's nothing wrong with them doing the work, but I think unless you've been in some of these systems, unless you swam in the waters, it's really hard to have that perception.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's so easy to know an idea, to know a concept, and if you haven't really tried to apply it, you think you know, but you don't know. And also, you know how it is when you learn an idea or a truth, and then you try to apply it in your life. You learn a lot about yourself, and that may be the most valuable thing about these things that we try to share in leadership development. Is there's the idea, and then there's how each of us try to apply the idea. And that's where the real learning happens. And I think you're right. If you're not a practitioner of the practices themselves in a leadership capacity, in some ways, it's kind of impossible to know what you're even really dealing with.
Yeah, you're also making me think about the idea of, you start with, in the book, you talk about two leaders that you worked with who had very similar credentials, but very different styles of working. And the idea of you never quite know how you're going to respond to these scenarios or these situations until you're in the soup. So there's something to be said about, and even when you do it once, it doesn't mean you're going to do it the same the next time either. So how do we start to really learn from those habits? And that's one of the things that, and why I started the Courage Effect was, how do we actually look at the patterns that we sit in? And as you said, like you understanding your patterns and too, like having just more of that self-awareness, but really and truly understanding the environment that you are creating by how you're showing up every day. And it sounds like you've had more than enough experience as both inside systems and the clients that you've been working with to see that.
Yeah, there was a moment when we were writing the book, and my son Joseph was helping research a part of several chapters. He organized the research for and did some draft work. And there was this one chapter is called Escape Email Hell. And what we did was we found out the most distracting digital messaging habits that leaders and colleagues have that make it very difficult for people to just stay and work. We teased these out into 8 archetypes. So one of them is, for example, like the novelist. The novelist is this leader or this person who's dropping these novellas in your inbox, and they're massive and they're dense, and you kind of almost even pretend that they're not there because you have to go through and read it all and sort it all out. And then what's the rule in return? If you get a novella, do you have to return a novella? Like, how much do you have to write to make sure that they recognize that you see the gravity in what they're putting together? And then there's 7 others that are like this. And the idea was we wanted to learn what are the things that we do digitally in communication that's distracting to others, and then help teams be able to do this as well. What can you see in each other? And then how can you work together to create norms to make it much lighter? Well, while we were doing this, in the middle of research and writing about this, I blasted this email off that wasn't very thoughtful, that completely wrecked like a full day of, my son's work, where he just couldn't focus. And that happened a bunch of times, where we were in there researching, learning from the very best leaders, learning from leaders who were really distracting. And then I would literally, while we were writing the chapter, do the thing that was ultra distracting.
Well, it sounds like it wasn't lost on you at the same. It's one of those things where you're doing it, but you're still doing it.
Yes.
Yes. I like that. That's just the deep answer to that. I'd love to talk a little bit about, that actually is one of the chapters that I am very interested in, is the escaping the email hell, because it's the systems that we've created that were supposed to make our lives easier, but then we've turned them into something that are completely corrupting. I don't even know what I want to say, but it's turned into that chaos. I'm curious for you, as you started researching for this book, was there anything that really surprised you when you started doing the research that was the opposite of maybe what you were originally expecting?
Well, there was, so we didn't know what the answer was going to be. What we wanted to know when we started the project was, we started with email and digital communication. We'd been hearing this in teams, that people just felt like the way that they were communicating and working together made it very difficult for them to get into a really focused place and to be comfortable there to get high quality work. And so we started there. We were researching what were the most digitally distracting ways that we were communicating that made it difficult for people to focus, and especially for management. And then we pushed beyond that. We had some people that said, hey, this is great research, but what if you were to push to thinking about just distraction and burnout as a whole? What are the things that we do to create space where people are able to slow things down and really get into a place where they're thinking deeply about their work in an environment that is really, distracting, and most people aren't able to do this. And what are those leaders doing that make that possible versus these leaders that aren't, or that are making it worse? And the news in all of it is we did over 300 one-on-one interviews for an hour plus. We taught hundreds of people in workshops, and we took in thousands of stories. It was a lot of data. As we analyzed that, the answer was very interesting. It was, the news in the project was that the difference between the 12 behaviors that scored the highest to help people step up and play bigger by going deeper and slowing down, those 12 behaviors were all a form of tapping the brakes. Not necessarily like offsites for the week, but just little ways, little micro ways that these micro behaviors that leaders would use. Like, for example, if I'm going to delegate something to you, if I'm your boss, just how do I slow down just a bit so we can make sure that this is the right exchange, this is the right move, this is the right bargain for us to make, for me to ask you to do something different. So there's a whole chapter on there called Tune In Before You Jump In. And it's, how do you tune in before you ask somebody to jump in? And this is an example of a micro behavior where they're literally just tapping the brakes. Or you can think of it as a performance pit stop. We know in racing that if you miss the pit stop, you may blow a tire or, run out of fuel depending on the racing type. And so you need those pit stops to be able to maintain performance. And I'd say that was the news. It was like, whoa, all of these behaviors that these leaders do that score really high for deep work, they were all a form of slowing things down. But the opposite was true on the other end. The leaders who caused the most confusion and the most chaos and built environments that made it very difficult for people to get into deep concentration and to access their full cognitive abilities, these people were just on the gas all the time, full steam ahead. And there wasn't this pausing, if you will, to get to brilliant work. It's almost like standing in a field where it's all burnt and it's flammable, and you light the match and drop it. The whole field's going to go up, because that's the environments that we already work in. There's so much energy, there's so much speed, there's so much connectivity. We're expected to be on all the time, or we can be. And so if you have a leader that's driven and they're really pushing in that environment and they're not slowing down, it makes this ability to focus almost impossible. And so I wasn't ever going to write a book called Pause. I didn't know that the answer was tap the brakes. And so that was the news in the research.
That's interesting that that's not where you started, but that's where you ended up. And I'm glad that you did, because it's desperately needed. And I feel like it's more and more desperately needed, because it just keeps getting worse and worse. The field is drier and drier and ready to turn into kindling. And I want to just give a quick overview of the book for the audience. Pause is a deliberate act of slowing down so your team can concentrate on what matters, regardless of the distractions that surround them. It's a framework to protect yourself and your team from disruptive forces like fuzzy goals, pressure to overcommit, and nagging anxieties that throw people off their game. The thing that is really resonating for me with this book is that pausing is something that I think people dream about doing, but day to day, it's not sexy enough. Like, there's just that pull to always be going, to always be on. I mean, and I love your analogy of like the 7-Eleven that never closes, right? It's that idea that the open sign is constantly on. I'm curious, what is the moment that a leader realizes that they are starting to train their team to be the store that never closes?
There's I believe it's in the introduction to the book, I share this story where I realized that I really needed to figure this out, because I was teaching a Multipliers workshop at a cloud computing company in San Jose. It's going great. 120 people in the room. We were having fun. And we were exploring this idea on what are the ways that we, with the very best of intentions, accidentally shut people down. This concept's known as the accidental diminisher in Multipliers. And while we were in it, something happened that I'd never experienced before. So here I am, I'm teaching this. You can imagine I'm at the front of the room and I'm facilitating. There's a big, there's a projector up and a big set of slides. And right mid-sentence, a man in the middle of the room stood up, let's call him Jeff, slammed his hand down on the table. I mean, we were all just, it stopped everybody looking at me. He says, man, I'm so angry right now. And it took me a little bit to get my breath. You don't have that happen very often. Everyone looked at me, then everyone looked at him, and everyone looked back at me. And I didn't say anything. I didn't know what to say. And I was glad that I didn't, because maybe there was this probably awkward eternity of 3 seconds before he said, we were talking about this idea of responding, at rapid speed all the time, like lightning reactive responses to every piece of, material that comes into you through Slack and your email and all this. And he said, I used to not do this. I used to really create space for myself to focus and to prioritize and to be cautious about the way that I work. But there's so much pressure here for me to go fast. I mean, he said, we're addicted to speed. It's up on every wall, go faster, that I've just passed this on to my team. And now I work in a way where I'm making them crazy too. And they're not doing the best work of their careers and they're not proud of it. And I'm not proud of it. And we're all burning out. And he's like, and I feel so frustrated. I'm like, what am I going to do about this? And, I had no answer for that in that moment. It was one of those moments where you leave kind of knowing that the problem that was presented wasn't addressed. And that was when I actually decided, what I want to figure out. I'd learned working with Liz Wiseman that maybe the best way to figure out an answer to a problem like this is to look through the eyes of those people that had been affected, like through his eyes. And so that was when we started the interviewing to interview people. What has a leader done for you in your career that made it possible for you to focus deeply, even if the environment was quite distracting and hyper-connected and now hyper-generative, versus a leader who, so you had this leader that created space for you versus a leader who made the already chaos worse. Yeah. And so that was the beginning. That was where we kind of got the research question and started to research it. And it took some time to see what the pattern was as we started to collect all of these. It wasn't until we got them all up on a board and we saw the behaviors that scored the highest. They were the ones that showed up the most, observable behaviors that helped or hurt people's ability to get deep into work. And then it was clear, like the news was, as I mentioned earlier, it's like, whoa, these leaders are really good at tapping the brakes versus these leaders that just kind of put their foot on the pedal all the time. But that was the moment that I realized that I really wanted to go after this work and to learn what the answer was. And I had no idea what the answer was going to be. But it was pretty brilliant experience to find out.
That is a very powerful story. And I can only imagine having that happen in front of a room of 100 plus
people.
You
feel small, and you just know that it wasn't supposed to really happen on your watch, and so it was one of those moments where you're like, oh, I gotta be really careful on how I my next steps and what I say here, but I'm really grateful for this man to have the courage to kind of just let it all out, man. It's clearly changed my life and the work that I was working on.
And to be so vulnerable in that moment too, having the courage to say it and to do it in front of everybody, because then he's also taking accountability for perpetuating the cycle.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And it's so true. That was as you know, like that was a very courageous moment. And it led me to do something interesting for those next 5 years, 6 years.
Yeah. You also, in the book, you're talking about distinguishing between giving people permission to focus and actually sponsoring it. What does that look like?
Yeah, it's one of my favorites as I looked at the behaviors. And it's this idea that if you go beyond giving people permission and sponsor people to do focused work, that's using your resources and your reputation to create space for people to do great work. Because what we learned is that the permission to disconnect, it's not enough. Yeah. The moment pressure hits your team, they're going to abandon whatever productivity strategies to prove their loyalty, to be that. Most people just want to help out. They just want to do good things for the tribe, and we're built this way. So what we learned is that when leaders have take the time to use their reputation, their resources to create systems where people can focus, now all of a sudden you can protect your team's ability to do exceptional work. And actually it's not it's just a little different than what leaders are already doing. It's just a little bit more deliberate. It's just a little bit more clear on how you talk to your peers and your boss about, what they can expect from your team, for your team to know what you expect for them, to be able to sponsor this monk mode where people can get in deep and stay there and feel comfortable with it.
Mm. You're also making me think, and this was something that I struggled with when I was in leadership, and that I see a lot of my clients struggling with as well, which is you want to reduce noise for your team. You want to be able to give them the space and to pause, to have that work. But in order to do that, you tend to sacrifice yourself and take on more. So I'm curious, as you did this work, when you're talking about we need to do this for our teams, how do we do that and at the same time not corrupt ourselves?
Well, and it is really, I mean, let's just first say for all leaders, it's kind of the nature of the work that, great leaders are going to be taking on a lot of work that would make it possible for their team to do their very best work, like in traditional coach style. They're creating a pitch that people can get out there and play. And so there's I don't want to oversimplify it, and to be sure, I want to speak to the challenge of it and how tough it is. However, there are some things that we saw in the research among these leaders who are really good at this that seem to be very consistent. And in the first part of the book, so there are three parts, kind of main distractions that we found in the research. You can think of it this way. So the first was, imagine you're playing a game and you go to the field and there's a scoreboard and there's some tools, but like a stick and this, but you don't know actually how the game works. You don't know exactly what the game is. Maybe it's the first time you're seeing Quidditch and you're not, you weren't a wizard or a witch. And so you are seeing this and you can kind of get an idea for it. And you can even kind of play because games are similar, but it's very difficult to know what exactly to focus on to win.
Yeah.
And so this represents this. The first part of the book that we found is that most people who were distracted said the targets were almost clear. They were a little fuzzy. And there's a difference between extremely clear and kind of clear. We all know what that is. It's so hard to place bets on kind of clear because in kind of clear, there can be 1,000 targets. You've only got so many arrows and you can't shoot them all, but you can tell they're all targets, but you're not too sure which ones are the targets that you're supposed to be aiming for. So this was the first major distraction that we found, was people were just unclear on all of the many, many things that they could be focusing on the few things that they were going to place their bets on. The second was this kind of sense where, imagine though, go back to this analogy, you were playing this game, but it was just packed shoulder to shoulder. And you see the examples of how, some people play, but you can't really play that way because there's just no room to do it. There's no room to really practice. And this was the second piece. The second piece was people were saying they literally just had no mental, emotional space to be able to get into things deeply and to stay there. And then the final thing was keeping with this analogy. Imagine if you were playing with teammates where you were getting elbowed in the face all the time and, excluded from certain drills or this, and you just feel upset. You feel like there's things that are happening that you're irritated with, but there's no way to talk about it. You can tell that there's nobody on the team is talking about these things. And so, you're not too sure really how to broach the frustration that you have. This was the third major distraction. It's this rumination, this time travel from things happening that, steal people's attention, their ability to concentrate, but there's no way to get it out. So what we saw in this was that these leaders that were pretty good at not overcommitting or not taking on everything is they recognized that you have to slow things down to make things clear, to pick what are the few things we're going to bet on. We got way too many important things that we could do. But the belief, the underlying assumption among these leaders were, we cannot do all of this. And so we're going to have to pick the few things that we can do really well.
Yeah.
And the second assumption and belief that we saw among these leaders was, we will need space and time to do our very best work. And then the final thing that we found, and where does that lead? Well, that leads to a very deliberate way to think about how can you give people the requisite emotional and mental space that they're going to need to go do one thing, let's call it your major, very, very well. And so then the third thing that recognizing that people were, well, what we saw was that these leaders that were really good at dealing with emotional frustrations and ruminations and time travel, they had these ways of, tapping the brakes where people could say the things that were bothering them. They even came up with ways to get the hard things, off of your chest, to play your cards, if you will. When people failed, they had very specific ways of helping people recover from failure. When people were worried about their careers, they had very simple ways to just talk in general consistently about the direction of someone's growth. And when they recognized that people were doing something a little different, they were mindful, they saw, oh man, you're coming in like 15 minutes late, all of a sudden. You're normally 15 minutes early. What's going on in your world? And they were mindful of the things that were changing. And this kind of mindfulness leads to discovery. It leads to a sense that, man, my boss sees me. And so to answer that question, which is a really hard one, I think it's in the mindset. If you work on the underlying assumption, I can't do all of this. We can't do all of this. That's one. Number two is we are going to need space to do brilliant work. That's two. And number three is people are going to need space to talk about what's bothering them. We're going to need to have systems to bring up the things that are hard, that we're the burdens that we're bearing. And so I think that there's these three beliefs. We call it a bias towards impact in the book versus a bias towards action. Action is good, but you can be doing a lot of activity and not get the impact. Whereas these leaders who had this bias towards impact, they tended to slow things down to deal with some of these challenges, getting clear, creating space, restoring harmony, emotional harmony inside of individuals. And in a weird way, it kind of made it to where they had a little less on their plates. You don't deal with all the wreckage that comes from running at full speed ahead and ignoring these things, believing you can do it all, not creating space for quality, or just not dealing with the frustrations that people are feeling. And so I think you end up with a little less, albeit though there's lots of pressure and it's still very challenging.
You're making me think, though, it's interesting. I actually was interviewed for a podcast this morning, and I was talking about different ways that leaders can pause, was a part of it. But she said, there's so many things that are about mindset and to consider before going into these conversations. She's like, how do they hold space for all of this? It seems like the cognitive load of this is really significant. And I said, well, that's the challenge, is that we keep backburnering it to a point of we have to be able to create space for it. When we start creating cracks for it and give it air to breathe, then the other noise goes away, right? We clear the space out, which is exactly what you're saying. And that to me is, you have to have the pause because it opens up, it gives air to all of these things that you've been suffocating.
There's this story that Annie wrote, my wife, in chapter 1, and I think that I really love it. It's about this coach, Phil Maffetone, and he runs into this ultra athlete. Alan was, and this fellow had, he was world class, and he was trying to compete at the highest level, but he kept getting hurt. And Maffetone comes in to coach Alan, and what he essentially says to him is like, look, you're overtraining, you're going too fast all the time. We're going to need to go slower. And it was just murderous for Alan as an athlete. He prided himself on just the pace that he could maintain for long periods of time. And so Maffetone has him slow down and to train at a lower pace and get his heart rate right. Now we call that zone 2. At the time, nobody was calling it zone 2. And the outcome was incredible. At first, there's all this frustration as Alan's seeing people pass him all the time while he's racing. But the injuries slowed down. His ability to maintain the training went up, and he ultimately goes on to be one of the most decorated ultra athletes ever. And so what I love about that story is that there is something about speed, isn't there? We all kind of intuitively know that if you go hard all the time, you're going to blow a tire. You're going to get burnt out. And that we need to figure out how to calibrate speed. Speed is only useful if you're going in the right direction and it's sustainable. And that's the truth about intensity, is that, if we create, as you mentioned, these spaces to release the pressure, to recover, to think about, well, we were doing this. Is that still the thing that's most important? Should we be thinking about, doing this? Like, all of these things require taps on the brakes. And if you don't, then, we just run ourselves ragged. And I think that I've really struggled throughout my career, where I've overdone it and I haven't been able to perform at the level that I could have. And so for what I do is I just end up doing a lot of really low priority work because it makes me feel good, rather than really slowing down and sorting out, like, where's the contribution here?
Yes. And that echoes very deeply for me too. And it is one of those things where, I've done that to the point of disempowering others, right? Like it gets to the point of you're doing all of this work and you're rescuing and you're saving and you're taking people away from what they're capable of. So that's the additional bigger wake of those behaviors. You're also making me think, and I know that you talk about this in the book, is that we are in this multi-generational workplace, 5 generations, and Gen Z is really coming in and giving us clarity on the ways that we are working. it's not going to work moving forward. They don't want to do it. They won't do it. And I see a lot of tension with leaders who are sort of missing that. They're like, well, this is what it is. Like, suck it up.
Yeah.
You got to earn those stripes. You got to do this. I'm curious for you. What is Gen Z seeing about our work that the older leaders are missing?
Well, I just heard a colleague say something pretty interesting, and they said this. It was like, it's pretty hard to know how to be in the room if you've never been in the room. And so all of a sudden we have this generation. Look, I've got three boys, 21, 22, and 24. And so they're they're square in this space, and I'm watching them all become professionals and the challenges that they're going through. And, there's so much to this. It's a fairly, I think it's a pretty sizable problem, but to be sure, they did Zoom school during COVID, and then school kind of continued to hang on to some of these remote things. And we've got a lot more remote work, and a lot of them are coming out of the workforce in it's straight to remote. They've grown up with really incredible attention grabbing devices that, give them unlimited amount of options that are planned for them to sort through. And so I think that one of the things that's happening is I was actually just working with a client who said, our mentors and our leaders don't want to mentor these younger kids because they're really struggling to step up and play in a way that is comfortable for the managers. They're not finishing assignments. They don't want to stay as long. They want to come a little bit later. They want more options. And there was just a lot of frustration in there. And as I think about this, my own experience with my kids, and just think about the way that what they had access to, so many options, unlimited amount of choices, and then also not really being able to be in the room, if you will. And now all of a sudden they're in these workplaces. A lot of them are starting remote. We've learned from the studies that that's not great to start remote because you don't have mentors. You don't see how other people are working. I think actually we are needing leaders that are really good at tapping the brakes and slowing things down and doing more mentoring and clarifying what really is important. And there's this one chapter in the book called Coach Through Failure. And I really loved what I learned from these leaders. And that was that they planned for failure and they built these no blame cultures. There's a fun story about a Formula One, Total Wolff, who's this famous principal, I think for Mercedes right now. And he's brilliant at this no blame culture. You got to fix the problem, not the person. You got to, find the problem, find where it's, fix the system, not the person, if you will. And so these leaders were really good at helping people work through failure by planning for failure. And when you plan for failure, when you talk about even before we start, hey, how do we think that we're going to fail here? How will we recover from it? How do we help people fail and then get back on the horse immediately? Now, all of a sudden, you create this environment where people are feeling not sure that they want to, they're dipping their toe in the water. They're not sure that they want to jump in. One of the things that you can do to kind of get them engaged is to plan for failure right up front, to coach people through this. But a practice like this, for example, where you are slowing down to not assume that people know how to deal with the failures that are inevitable. So that when they do, instead of the anxiety taking them completely out of the game, they already know how to overcome the anxiety from the failure and get back in. I think that leaders are going to need to become very good at tapping the brakes to create these on-ramps, if you will, for people that are unsure about work. They're unsure about how to be in the room. So that way they can engage and get on the highway of work and stay on it. And that when the off ramps come or when we crash off to the side, that we have this way of getting people back on that piece of work. And I've seen it in my own boys. And I just think it's fair to them that I think we can learn how to lead in a way that really gets them into work in a way that they're loving. But I don't think it will be yesterday's strategy. I don't think that work at all. I think the assumptions that we used to make, I don't think they're true anymore for this generation and what they've grown up with.
Yes, I agree. And that's one of the things that is why it's so valuable to ensure that we're bringing them in and also learning from them. And there's no one way. And that's the thing that I keep coming back to in a lot of the work that we do. And your book is also incredibly practical. I love that you have the chapters. And then at the end, you have how do you look at these patterns? How do you unwind it, as it would be? Or what's the term that you use in the galleys?
Yeah, so we have this whole section called the pause tools. And what we did is we took every chapter and we turned it into a one-pager, essentially, with this, a very easy set of ways to apply the ideas in a moment. So it's, in a way, I think that these are just tapping of the brakes. And how can any leader just pick whichever pause they think their team needs the most, and get it in a minute and then go try it. And so our goal is let's make it easy. Was it Staples that created the easy button at one point? Were they the ones that had that marketing thing? You hit the easy button. We wanted it to feel that way. So even if leaders received the book from a friend or went to a workshop, that there would be something that they could access in minutes and to be able to go use it with their team.
And how do you think that leaders can effectively diagnose the pause that they need?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question, because I think the only way that we can know is by ask the people that work with us and for us. It is to present to them. Okay, and we have a quiz that that you can access for this, but it's to figure out, have your team take which of this little quiz to determine out which of the pauses they could benefit from the most. Whether it's maybe they're not clear on what the targets are, or work is coming at them at such a fast pace that they can't tell what's important, or maybe it's they have things that are really irritating them, but they don't know, they can't say it. So we've got this fun little quiz that you can do, and the idea is to have people take it with you to figure out what pauses do other people need. Now, I think a lot of people are going to know just right, like I did, right off the bat. I knew there was a whole handful of these. Like for example, if you were to give me a quarter for every single time that I went to a team member and said, "Hey, I got something that I need your help with. It will only take 5 minutes." It never takes 5 minutes. It's like the most manipulative thing in the world. And how can you say no to your boss if they say, "Hey, this is only going to take 5 minutes"? Oh my heck. I've done that so many times. When we were going through that part of the research, I was embarrassed. I was like, oh, I have done this over and over and over again. And instead of doing that, maybe I come to you and say, "Hey, what are you working on right now? What's on your plate?" And I just listen for a minute to kind of think, should I be delegating this? Or is what she's already working on more important than my little urgent thing that I really want to pass on to somebody? And it's just like, these are the little practices that I instantly saw in myself. Ooh, man, I know I do that. And I was able to make some changes pretty quick. There were other more complicated things that I couldn't see. And as the research came out, my team member had to, kind of say, like, look, you're doing this stuff. Like we are not, we're taking these corners too fast. Yeah. And it was a little harder for me to learn because I couldn't just see it. I needed to look through their eyes.
Yeah. Yeah. I so agree with you. I'm always blown away by how many people think, well, this is what my team needs. I'm like, what, have you asked them that recently?
Yeah.
Or have you asked them that period? And then recently, because then that might've changed in the course of, a month or whatever period of time.
Yes.
It's amazing that we have an idea, but a lot of the time we really don't know. And we know, obviously, with positional power in companies, people aren't necessarily going to be as ready to talk to you. So how do you really and truly build in feedback loops to allow for those conversations to happen? Not easy, but...
Well, and you just said it right. I think you have to build them in. If they're not built in, then it's just not going to happen. The feedback loop won't be there. People won't be able to share that thing that's bothering them. And for me, as a leader who just loves to get into things and to be busy and to be working hard and be moving things forward, my natural proclivity is to be driving and really moving things. I love it. It's exciting for me. It's a joy for me. I won't even notice. It's just the truth. I just will not even be aware at all that somebody has something frustrating or is bothering them. Oh, thank goodness I married an amazing person, because throughout my whole marriage, she was the one that was kicking me under the table because I was talking too much. So, but I've needed this because I'm just such a driven person. I'm so intense. I want to go. I want to do things. I just won't notice if people have things that are bothering them. I've needed to learn how to slow myself down to kind of just look around when everything's not a blur.
She's the pause button.
Yes, she is. Yeah, don't tell her that. She'll start hating it even more because now we've named this.
One of the other things as we wrap up the conversation, I really love that in this book, you're talking about sponsoring monk mode is one of the ideas, but it's the idea of building an environment where the impossible becomes probable.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that, because that word, like that probable at the end, I'm like, yes. Like I'd love to just have you end talking about that.
Well, here's the thing. I mean, if we all just ask ourselves the question, when have you done your very, very best work? So let me ask you, when have you done your very, very best work? And explain what the conditions are like.
It's when I have the freedom to think and when I'm given the space to be able to do that and to do deep work. And despite me putting time on my calendar, I'm always like, oh, I have to do this. It's when the urgent is, it prioritizes or it goes above the important. And that is always killing me. And I am my own worst culprit.
Yeah. So think about this. Now let's put AI in the mix. We've all probably, most of us have, and if you haven't, give it a go, had an experience where you worked for a full day or maybe several hours deeply with AI on a problem versus trying to do it in 5 minutes. What's the difference? It's massive. It doesn't matter what kind of intelligence you're working with, because the first round of thinking that you're going to get from anything, whether it's AI or the genius sitting next to you, we need time to think things out thoroughly, to consider all the different, perspectives and advantage points to be able to do something. And everybody says that when you do your very, very best work, you're not stuck in the shallows, as that brilliant book, Stuck in the Shallows, named. But you're in a deeper place, you're in a slower place, you're able to concentrate, you're able to walk around things, even if you're moving in and out of this state. And so I think that the only way that we can really make improbable, but maybe even impossible outcomes to occur is when we are working at a pace where people's, curiosity can survive, where their empathy can be, in full force, where they can be thinking through and moving through challenges and deep frustration, even as they're moving up against obstacles and then trying to find our way around it. It's when we produce our best work as humans. And a lot of times, if we get into those deep spaces and we don't find an answer, but then we step out and we go back into a state where we're not thinking, because we went to that place of such intensity, we then can have the epiphany later on how to solve the problem. But if you don't have that wrestle, you can't actually have the revelation when you're at rest. And so I think that it is possible to make almost impossible work, or impossible work probable. But we have to be real about what it is that our team needs to be able to do this. And as you know, in this season, it's about creating an environment. Because here's what I know: environments, they eat personal productivity for breakfast. Chip and Dan Heath, I think they did this in Switch, and many others have, that it is about the environment. And every leader can create this microculture, these bubbles. We saw it. They were ever in the research. One leader was getting 3 times the amount of focus from their team in the same company to their peer next to them, if you will. And so the world will not slow down. We will be expected to do more and to take on more. And it's how can we, where we stand with our team, create as much space as possible for this deep work. And I've been inspired. I've seen hundreds and hundreds of leaders doing this. And as a result, their people are doing incredible work in an environment where it's probably not likely that they would.
Yeah. I am really grateful that you were doing this work. I'm grateful that you wrote this book, and I'm really glad that we're getting it on the radar of so many people. And it really takes me into, I always say the foundation of change and the foundation of my coaching is 5 words: what, so what, now what? And I feel like this book gives you all of that. And it's so much of it is like that, now what? That's where we don't know what to do. And you've really outlined that at every single level. And you do it where it's fun and interesting, and you tell great stories. So Shawn, what a pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thanks for having me on. I love your work. And, and listen, it's hard to be a leader. I'm not a very good leader. I love to contribute. I struggle to lead. And for those of us that take it on and we feel the role, whether we ask for it or not, I just know how hard it is. And our hope was, this was the biggest insecurity that Annie and I had in doing this piece of work. We just hoped we could do justice. These leaders that we studied, that they had built the discipline to slow people down in a way that they were doing, slow down in a way that other people were doing brilliant work. And I hope that what we've reported on and what we've shared is just useful for other leaders that are much better than me to do the same.
Well, thank you for that. I know that I will be putting some of them into practice myself. So massive gratitude.
Well, thanks, Suzanne, for having me. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you, Shawn. I agree. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Stay courageous. Thanks for spending time with me at The Courage Effect. Before you go, a reminder: the way that you lead is the way that you live. There is no brave version of you at work that shows up small everywhere else. Courage does not compartmentalize. It is a daily practice in the small choices you make that nobody claps for. That is the work that we do at Weller Collaboration, helping leaders to stop performing leadership and start practicing it from a lived, real place. For more information, check out wellercollaboration.com. If this episode gave you something, please listen to our next one. That's how you can give back. Share it with somebody else who is wrestling with their own brave next step, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. A quick thank you to my guest, to Dave Nelson for creating our theme music, and to Heather Groenick for her administrative magic. I am Suzanne Weller. Keep choosing courage, one honest moment at a time. I'll see you for our next show.